Today's reading is Matthew 28, verses 1 to 10, and I'm reading from the NIV version at page 1000. After the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you." So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." Amen.
Wow, what a weird thing. On the first day of the week, everything had gone on hold because of the Sabbath. Jesus had died on the Friday that we now call Good. And his body had been taken down from the cross. A prominent and respected member of the Sanhedrin, the ruling Jewish council, the murderers of the Son of God. A member of this council decides that he's through with this self-serving clique and steps across the divide to align himself with Jesus and his disciples. Joseph, he is called, from a town in Judea called Arimathea. Joseph, along with his companion Nicodemus, become Christians. And they bury Jesus in a tomb that Joseph had had cut for himself. Joseph is in a hurry to do this quickly because of a law in the Old Testament, the book of Deuteronomy, that the corpse of a criminal hung on a tree should not be left there overnight, lest it defile the land. I'm just going to read this to you from Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 22 and 23. If someone guilty of a capital offense is put to death and their body is exposed on a pole, you must not leave the body hanging on the pole overnight. Be sure to bury it that same day, because anyone who is hung on a pole is under God's curse. You must not desecrate the land the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. By Jesus' day, crucifixion, suspending a person from a wooden cross, was deemed equivalent to hanging on a tree. So the same legislation applied. Everyone accepted that. And the wealthy Joseph's burial of Jesus' body in his own unused tomb provides one final allusion to the fate of Isaiah's suffering servant who was similarly assigned a place with the rich. We're going to leave that concept of somebody who is hung on a tree and becomes unclean. We're going to leave that for another day. But if you can remember this idea that this is a person who is cursed, and on another occasion we'll be able to explore the idea of the fact that under the new covenant that's no longer the case. But back to how it was at the time. It was all bad. It couldn't be worse. And then this weird thing happens, or in fact several weird things happen. Earthquakes, angels, women running to and fro, a strange command. For Matthew's readers, this is a highly unlikely story, which is, of course, the point. Expect the unexpected from the God of surprises. Nobody in the first century and nobody now should think that the point of the Easter story is that this is quite a reasonable thing to happen, that dead people come to life again. No, the point of the Easter story is that this is unreasonable. It's outside the bounds of human comprehension, outside our normal ability to get our heads around that type of thing. This is not normal. But then when you think about it, if God really is God, if there is a God, if God exists, then he's going to do something God-like. In the previous chapter of Matthew, we find the centurion guarding the crucified Jesus. He is stunned and says, surely he was the Son of God. The most unlikely bit of this story is the bit that really does show that the early Christians were not making this up. The first witnesses were women. People would prefer not to say that, because in those days women were not regarded as reliable witnesses in a court of law. And whilst things are different in that case nowadays, we still have limits. Let me tell you this story about when our children were, well, a lot younger. We were on holiday and we went to some, children's attraction. We got to the cash desk and I asked the woman, how much? How much is it for us? How much is it for the children? It was such and such for us, and for children under 5 were free. But after that, once they were 5, you had to pay. I'm 5, said our oldest child, Ruth. She said it to the woman at the cash desk. She said it to the woman behind us in the queue. She said it to the man behind the woman in the queue. She said it to the dog. 3. I'm 5. She went round telling everybody, I'm 5, I'm 5. No one was going to take the word of an adult. Because no one was going to believe that she wasn't 5. The entire queue burst out laughing. No one was going to believe that she wasn't 5. No one. Now we would have paid anyway, but I had to say that. I was writing this story, and I think, they're going to think I was trying to cheat. So I better say that, and of course none of you have believed me now. What I'm trying to say is that on this occasion, the word of a 5-year-old is believed over somebody who might have tried to cheat, an adult who might have tried to cheat. And on this occasion, the word of a 5-year-old is going to be believed over an adult. That's the reverse of how it was in those days. You weren't going to believe a woman. Who's going to believe a woman? To have a believable resurrection story, it would have been better. It would have been far better for the story if the first witnesses had been men. When Paul recounts the story of the resurrection in 1 Corinthians, when he writes this to the Christian church, the role of the women witnesses is quietly removed from the story. Here it is, that Jesus was raised on the 3rd day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time. So that's the story as it was told later. What you wouldn't do is to insert women into a story subsequently. Far more likely is that they really were the first witnesses and are subsequently airbrushed out. Until Matthew writes, and the other gospel writers write their story. We're all guilty of things like that. You know, recently I was down in Edinburgh. We went to the theatre to see a show about a man called Alexander Hamilton, one of the founding fathers of the United States. I'd never heard of him. And I just wonder if that was the case because ethnically he was black. He was Afro-Caribbean. But we all do that kind of thing. We all sometimes like to sideline things for our own benefit. Do you do it? It's a thing to look out for. We've just got to be careful of this kind of thing in our own behaviour and seek to avoid it. Don't airbrush things out for your own convenience. But anyway, and back to our Bible passage, the unusual prominence of women in this story shows that things are now changing. A new order is arising, and for a reason, which is nothing to do with women, nothing to do with believing a child, a 5-year-old, over an adult. From that first Easter day, everything has changed. The whole idea of what God has done for us is strength through weakness. This year in politics, we have, as I'm sure you all know, a lot of elections worldwide. This year, apparently about half of the world gets to vote in some way or other. Russia, the United States, the United Kingdom, and so on and so forth. Now, to succeed in that kind of an environment, you have to be seen to be powerful in order to lead your country. But in God's kingdom, the rules are different. Easter has changed everything. And we are told this in advance. We are forewarned that things are going to change. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, when we are introduced to this suffering servant in Isaiah. Here's a verse from Isaiah 53. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Low esteem is not the kind of information you want to put on your electoral leaflet if you want people to vote for you. You're not going to write, "I have low esteem," and push it through people's doors. Who would vote for the suffering servant? But you see now for Christians, the rules have changed. A minute ago, I quoted Paul from the book of Corinthians, and I'm going to quote 1 Corinthians again, where Paul emphasizes this theme. We preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, in other words, everybody, to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. This is part of what Easter is all about. God is doing a new thing. And as Jesus said earlier in the Jesus story, the first shall be last and the last first. Easter is a day to put everything upside down and inside out. One of the things that makes me smile about so many Bible stories is that when the angels appear, the first thing the angel says is, "Do not be afraid." And here again we read it in verse 5 of our Bible reading from chapter 28. After a violent earthquake, an angel of the Lord appears, rolls back the stone from the tomb, and sits on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. Verse 5, the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid, for I know you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He's not here. He has risen, just as he said. Do not be afraid." Not so easy if you are faced with an angel. Do not be afraid. But things have now changed. My friend Margaret, who sang at our wedding, told me that she once, this is before I knew her, she sang on songs of praise. She said that once you have sung live on TV, you are never afraid of anything ever again. 2,000 years down the timeline, Matthew is telling us that we too should not be afraid. What is there to be afraid of if Easter has dealt with the greatest monster of all, death itself? Why should you be afraid of anything if Jesus has been raised from the dead? If the old world's laws are now finished and we are in a new creation. Do not be afraid of anything anymore. That is the message of Easter. Death has been defeated through the grace of God in Jesus. Do not be afraid.